and I'm really thrilled to be here moderating this session with the two people who are setting the course for the administration on climate. Gina McCarthy, who is the White House National Climate Advisor and a former EPA administrator, and Michael Regan, who is the current EPA administrator. So we'll get to some questions later on, so please be thinking about those. We'll have mics coming around, but I'm just going to jump in with some questions. This is obviously a very exciting and interesting time to be having this session. In the news, we have a Supreme Court ruling in the coming days around EPA's authority on climate. We also have, the reconciliation bill in Congress that may or may not pass in the coming weeks, and these are both huge, decisive things. And so I want to start with the news, or maybe the non-news, given that the Supreme Court did not rule today, but just to ask a little bit about how the administration has been preparing one way or the other for a decision, and how you've been thinking about this case, which has really been in the works for the past, more than a year. So it's great to hear from both of you your thoughts.
Well, I can say that we have been focused on how to advance the ball in this space from day one. The president has set a very aggressive climate agenda, and this is a significant piece of that. Obviously, we're waiting in anticipation to see not only what the Supreme Court says, but how far they go. So I would say that we have worked on multiple scenarios to be prepared for multiple reactions from the Supreme Court. But I don't want us to lose focus on the fact that the president has a suite of tools that we can deploy to really begin to move the power sector to a clean energy future. And so the Supreme Court will rule that will govern our direct authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. But the Clean Air Act gives us a suite of tools that we will deploy to get that full approach to the power sector.
And let me just join in by saying that, I've been working in government a long time, and there's always challenges. This is one of them, and there are many more. And I think the focus that this president brings to the table is that EPA is a great tool to actually make progress on climate, but it's not the only tool we have. We started out the Climate Policy Office because the president decided that climate is actually impacted by every piece of the administration moving forward, and the federal government needs to be prepared across the board to take action. So as Administrator indicated, it's really important that people understand that we've set very solid goals. We're making significant progress on the transition to clean energy, and that is not going to live and die by the Supreme Court's decision tomorrow. And so we just need to double down. We need to look at the opportunities that we have available to us and recognize that not just the climate is changing, but the world's changing. Our ability to have safe and secure energy is going to be an essential component of how the U.S. maintains its leadership and how we work domestically. And clean energy is the winner. Whether you like it or not, it already is. And so we're not searching for the next innovation. We'd love it, but I got the innovations I need to move forward. So to me, we're not going to lose our stride. The only thing we're going to try to continue to do is go faster. That's the key to winning the future for our kids.
Well, I want to pick up on something, Administrator Regan. You mentioned the full suite of different approaches that you can use, and for people who aren't following closely, the Supreme Court, it could go many different ways, but they're looking at a particular provision of the Clean Air Act, and there are all these other things that might be useful for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so, Supreme Court aside, I wonder if you could just talk about the full suite, and what are some of the other tools in the toolbox that you might lean on that we're yet to see.
Yeah, I think I'll just say that because of the great work done by Gina and the Obama administration, and when you look at the Clean Power Plan, irrespective of how the Supreme Court rules, that plan changed the behavior of the power sector. So for over a decade, we've seen the power sector move forward. Now, the reality is that it's our job to protect public health and the environment. So we have a suite of regulations that reduce ozone and PM, and we regulate coal ash waste to ensure that that ash isn't touching water supplies. We ensure that there aren't discharges. And so what has happened over a decade is many of these regulations, the power sector would describe it as dying by death by 1,000 paper cuts. Typically, the agency would roll these rules out one at a time, and they would be making decisions in silos. What we've said is, because of court cases and because the last administration punted on taking action, that we have a suite of regulations that we can present to the power sector in one fell swoop, looking at regulating water, waste, and air quality. And the power sector then can take a look at the economics to comply with those rules at one time, or they can say, hey, to hell with the past, let's invest more quickly in the future. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about presenting a full suite of options to the power sector in concert with this ruling of the Supreme Court to have them have longer-term investment opportunities about what's best for their business model. And Gina's point is right on target. It's not a matter of whether or not clean energy is the future. It's how quickly do we all want to go. And right now, it's more than just public health. It's more than just protecting the planet. We're talking about national security, and we're talking about this country being globally competitive. We want to be international players. We want to create the jobs. We want to create the new business models. We want to innovate and export these technologies. So there is a capitalistic aspect to this as well. And our job, my job as EPA administrator, our job at the EPA is to provide the rules for the road so that we can get these long-term investments so that our country can be competitive and healthy.
Great. Well, I want to just pivot a little bit to the other news item that I mentioned, which is reconciliation, and just to ask, what do you think is the sort of best case from your perspective?
Well, the best case is to get something done and get done now. That's my best case. It would be great to go back to the hotel, get an email, and say, "Okay, the deal's been made." I feel very confident that there's movement forward. I can't tell you exactly what time that may happen, but I think the president's been very clear all along in his movements on clean energy, on moving forward with solar and battery technologies, moving forward with offshore wind. There's a suite of efforts already underway, and we know that that gets us the vast majority to the reductions and the goals that the president really set, which were very bold, but we can meet them. The challenge that we face is that we need more. And the sooner that reconciliation can move forward and we can get those added benefits in terms of accelerating this change, that's what we need to have. And so he's not going to be persuaded by stalling, and he's not going to be deterred from taking bold action. And so we need these. We want them. Does it mean we won't try to find other ways to get there? Of course we will. We're going to find every way humanly possible to get there. And so part of the excitement that we feel, I think, is that, to me, I'm working in this administration because the president's vision was very much as Michael has indicated. We have opportunities now to transfer to clean energy in a way that grows thousands of jobs. Mm-hmm. We just had a recent report that was put out that's showing all of the energy and the employment stats from last year. Clean energy is winning. Fossil fuels losing jobs. We're gaining them every step of the way. So we can gain jobs, we can make them good-paying union jobs, so we can rebuild the middle class, we can address the challenge of environmental justice and make it front and center instead of back thoughts, as it's been for too many decades, centuries. We can get things done here with clean energy. And I think, Justin, we talked about this a little bit, one of the most exciting things is when you set really firm goals and you have a president that won't waver, even though you have a war that got started, a pandemic we're challenged with, the economic hurdles that we face. He's still going after climate. He's not weakening those goals. He's not weakening his commitment. But what that's done is open up the door to the private sector finally jumping in. You know, when we fixed the solar problem a few weeks ago, we had $6 billion laid on the table by the private sector to advance that effort. When we went after offshore wind, we are seeing billions of dollars in investments that nobody ever anticipated. When we first knocked on the door at the automakers and said, hey, we got to go to EVs, they were like, yeah, how fast? And they simply make the shift because this is the future. And while we may have parts of our economy that would rather this not move, we have to keep our eyes focused on the prize and recognize that we need to build hope again after this pandemic. Yeah. We need to work together, get everybody engaged, and we will win this battle if we do that.
Great. Well, I mean, I want to come back to the private sector a little later, but just from the very top of your answer, it seems like I detect some optimism about reconciliation. Okay, but
yes,
yes,
you do.
Good. Okay. So I want to pull on something. You know, you referenced. You know, the president is moving on all cylinders. Regardless, one of those ways is the Defense Production Act, which he invoked, I suppose, just a few weeks ago. And I guess I would just ask in a very broad sense. Well, I should say the Defense Production Act on solar, as well as a range of other, you know, clean energy technologies. How much does this move the needle towards the administration's goals? And you know, is this an indicator of a bigger shift for the way that you're thinking about how you can really catalyze these changes?
I think it is a shift, and it goes along with the fact that the president, you know, set up this climate office to actually bring together every part of the administration. So we hang out with every secretary, every leader of an independent agency, and we talk to them about thinking about climate before and telling us how they're going to make a shift. And so the president didn't limit this to, oh, it's EPA's problem, or it's the Department of the Interior's challenge. It was everybody's. And so the Defense Production Act is a new way of bringing a tool to the table that's essential when those tools are necessary. And so the president is not holding back. If we can't get it through regulation, we will get it other ways. And so what we're talking about is actually, you know, moving, and EPA is doing great, and those regulations are going to be essential parts of the movement forward. But we're working with Housing and Urban Development to figure out how we're supporting housing. Let's make it efficient. Let's figure out how you advance solar. We're looking at spending the bipartisan infrastructure law in a way that makes sure we're looking at domestic content and giving a boost to that we're focused on environmental justice communities, and that we're giving them the training and the capacity they need to compete for these grants. So we're not going to limit ourselves by the old rules of the road when we have rules that we can use and perfectly legal tools to use. And the DPA was one of them. Nobody thought about it before we first used it with critical minerals, because you can't have EVs if you don't start figuring out how to get batteries to move. And last year we were leading on solar and wind and batteries. We actually had a higher level than ever before. We want to triple that this year. We want to go 10 times that the year next. And the only way you're going to do that is to stop thinking narrowly and to use every tool, like Treasury, going after and setting the course for how the private sector ought to once and for all tell us how they're meeting their commitments in a way that we can track it and follow it. You know, promises are great. I want to see whether you're delivering on them. And so we're going to start challenging this at every step of the way. And so it's fun. It means there's all kinds of new tools that we have available to us. And I know that may sound weird to call climate change fun. I don't mean climate change is fun, but fixing it is really cool. And we got to get moving. So it's been interesting.
Well, Administrator Regan, I want to come to you next. We've heard environmental justice has come up a little bit in this conversation already, but you've really tried to put that at the center of the work that you do. You were on the road visiting frontline communities. I just wondered if you could tell us a bit about what that experience was like, what you learned, and then how you're trying to reflect that in policy.
Yeah, I think, number one, leadership starts at the top, and we are fortunate, Gina and I are fortunate, to work for a president that has made environmental justice front and center in this administration. He's the first sitting president to talk about environmental justice in a State of the Union address. He is very serious about this, and so am I. It's really startling to truly understand some of the injustices that exist in this country in 2022. I was in Lowndes County, Alabama recently. 30% of the population in that county has hookworm, something that I thought was eradicated from this country. 60% of the people in Lowndes County don't have functioning septic systems. And so I toured communities where children were playing in the same yard that waste was spewing out from these septic systems. In Jackson, Mississippi, I visited an elementary school. I was supposed to visit some second and third graders. My son is 8 years old, so I figured I could talk to some 8 and 9-year-olds. And I showed up at the school, and all the kids were evacuated. And as far as the eye could see were porta potties lined up along the school. I thought that the school was having a big construction project. These were the facilities that these kids had been using because of low water pressure and poor water quality in that school. That means lost school days, cafeteria workers can't prepare lunch. And by the way, this is during a pandemic when our kids can't wash their hands and drink from water fountains. I visited another elementary school in one of the parishes near Louisiana that was thousands of feet away from a refinery spewing toxic chemicals while these children are in this facility trying to learn and play each and every day. These are things that are happening right now in this country in 2022. And it doesn't have to be that way. And so the president has charged all of us, not just the EPA, but all of us, to really focus on equity, inclusion, and justice. And these problems can't be solved sitting behind a desk in Washington, D.C. We have to get out, we have to visit our communities, and we have to use our governmental powers. But one of the powerful things about the Journey to Justice tour was some of these local communities that had never acted, as Gina said, for generations, for centuries. It makes a difference when a cabinet official has a motorcade coming into a small community to put a spotlight on problems that should have been fixed decades ago. And if you can bring local media, MSNBC, CNN, to highlight these problems, all of a sudden, these problems are solved before I got back to Washington, D.C. We're going to use the power of the bully pulpit to be sure that every single person in this country, especially every child, has an equal protection under the law from environmental harm and hazard.
So you mentioned the bully pulpit, but I'm curious, just at a very high level, because there's so much we could go into, to talk a bit about some of the other levers that you might pull on that, whether that be enforcement. You've made some moves on enforcement. There's also, of course, was funding in the bipartisan infrastructure law that helps support some of these environmental justice ends. And then, of course, Justice 40, I think, came up already. So maybe if you could just talk a little bit about some of those policy levers you're pulling there.
Absolutely. Here's the deal. Here's the difference. The difference with this president is he's got more than ideas. He's taken action. We have more levers and more resources than any administration ever has, not only to help this country, but to specifically focus on environmental justice. Under the American Rescue Plan, shortly after the president took office, Congress gave EPA $100 million just to focus on environmental justice projects. We were able to push resources to communities that had never been at the table or had resources to begin to address these problems. 50 million of that just focusing on basic air quality monitoring to arm them with the necessary information that they need. $50 billion from the bipartisan infrastructure law just to focus on water infrastructure issues like the ones I just laid out. Justice 40 sets the floor that 40% of those investments have to go in disadvantaged communities. The reality is that as we construct these programs, we're going to be hitting 60, 70, 80% of these resources going to the communities that need them the most. $50 billion, billion with a B. We've never had these resources. I know Gina is jealous
I
that
do.
she
It
never
really
had
ticks me off.
the walking around money that I have now, but it's different because we go in and we have the resources to fix some of these problems, but to the point you made, we also have some tools. Enforcement. We can go in and enforce existing laws and get people's attention, and we've done that. We can use technology. We don't have to have staff physically on site. We can use drone technologies. We can use robotics. We can use a lot of things now to keep these industries from cheating. So all we have to do is shine a light on some of this, and they begin to police themselves. So I'm excited about what we're able to do during this administration because we're using every tool in the toolbox, but Congress and the President has finally given EPA the resources to go out and make some of these things happen. And quite frankly, the conscience of this country is probably as awakened as it's ever been. So now, in addition to the resources and the regulations, we have the media on our side. We have social media. We have traditional media. We have people that want to tell these stories. And some of these problems can self-correct themselves.
So I want to come to you next and just to ask a bit about the private sector, to pull on that thread. First, I would just be curious to ask, how much is that a part of the Biden administration's strategy on climate? And then the second question, we've been talking about equity and justice. Clearly, the private sector is moving in a way that it wasn't when you were in the Obama administration. How do you ensure that transition is an equitable, just transition, as it, if it's being in part led by the private sector?
Yeah, I think it was even before President Biden took office, I think he made it very clear that he saw climate change as the way to really move forward with the clean energy transition. And that transition, which he has repeatedly said, especially after Ukraine war, is that's the only way we're going to have a safe and secure future or economy. And so he's always been looking at this as something that isn't a fight against the private sector, but it's a way to attract the private sector into our fight. Because we had to get real about where the future is and how we get there. And so I think that, we're seeing, for example, in offshore wind, the president just hosted a meeting with basically 11 of the governors who are in states along the East Coast, just to talk about how do we address permitting challenges, how do we compensate fisheries industries in a way that's known and guidance is produced, how do we move forward with connecting the grid in a way that makes the most sense so that regions can have access to clean offshore wind. And we had the companies sitting at the table. The big kahunas were there. And there was no argument there. It was a question of how we move forward as quickly as possible and how do we make sure that there's engagement at the community level, which is what Michael is referring to. So if you look at the bipartisan infrastructure law and how we're spending it, we are requiring communities to be at the table. We're not wondering whether they may show. We're telling them if you don't have communities, then you're going to start losing in these grant solicitations because you have to plan community engagement. You have to get tribal input before you're making decisions that have any impact on how tribes move forward. And so part of this is, I think the private sector is getting the hint. The fossil fuel companies are getting the hint, but part of what we're seeing is as a result of the Ukraine war, their hint is that I can make more money and keep it for myself. We have to figure out how we keep our eye on that side of the equation while we're advancing the side that's really looking at clean energy as our future. But I'm never going to take my eye off the rear window here because we have to make that shift and get the fossil fuel companies to acknowledge the challenges that climate change presents to us and how they are fundamentally a people issue. And the more we can get people engaged in these questions and these issues, the more they'll begin to see, I think, that they have a voice in them. and they can have a voice in them. We cannot let, us be dictated by folks that are selling a product that is really the highest product in terms of emissions that are generated that harm ourselves and our kids.
That's right.
So we have to make sure that we engage them to the extent we can to try to make that shift happen. But we're going to focus for sure, and we have been, on every tool we can to advance clean energy. And thankfully, it's working. And the private sector is figuring out how they can be part of that next generation instead of looking at how they can drag their feet a lot longer.
Well, I want to just encourage people. We're going to go to questions in just a few minutes. It looks like we already got a lot of them, so I don't have to remind people. I want to follow up on that question, Joe, just about you talk about the oil and gas industry, the fossil fuel companies, and they have talking points, and you have talking points as well. And I'm just curious, what is that engagement like? And I'd be curious to hear from both of you. You both engage industry. You both engage the energy industry in particular. What are those conversations like? Do you think that they're engaging constructively? And, I think the question that some activists would say is, why do it if they're not engaging constructively? So maybe Administrator Regan, and then we'll come back.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I would hesitate to paint the industry with one broad brush. There are a lot of leaders in the private sector that are trying to kick this door down. They actually are just as sophisticated in their messaging as Gina's message, which is, we live right now in an unfair system. We just want to create a competitive environment, and we know if we create a competitive environment, clean energy will win every single day. Not just from an economic development and job creation standpoint, but from a public health and saving the planet. So there is no contest. If we could alleviate some of these rules that prop up the fossil fuel industry and create a level playing field, we know that we'd be off to the races. So people look at me and say, well, you're a regulator, you issue regulations. The reality is that we issue technology standards. We provide the rules of the road for the types of technologies that companies should deploy to protect public health and the environment. So a lot of my conversations with the private sector are very constructive. It's about how can we not create rules that codify outdated technologies so that our rules can grow and keep pace with the growing economy and evolving technologies. Those are the kinds of conversations that we're having for the most part. For those that are dragging their feet, it's basically, you guys know what the rules of the road are. You know what the future is. You know you're harming people. Get on board or get left behind. So this is not a hostage negotiation. This is not a negotiation. This is a conversation about how we're all going to win the future. I've found a lot of these conversations very stimulating because technology can win the day. We just have to figure out how to give companies the running room to just deploy these technologies in a way that exceed all of our expectations and our imaginations. And it's there. I mean, it's very real and it's there.
Absolutely.
And I think just from my perspective, I know that the president and I know his White House team are constantly in discussions with the fossil fuel companies. And I know that there's been very collaborative approaches to moving forward. And as Michael indicated, in some instances there isn't that cooperation and movement. And so we're going to call the question when we see a problem, and we're going to call the question when we see things moving forward in a way that's really going to be conducive to the transition that we're looking to make. But I think the competing challenge that we have here is that we know we need to accelerate the transition. But we also know, and the president's been made very clear, that we don't want to leave communities behind. We also don't want to leave big economic kahunas behind either. We need to work together to support this shift. And I think the fossil fuel companies feel that shift.
Yeah.
And I think the real dynamic in question is going to be how quickly can we engage them in that positive shift, which we're trying to do every day, and make that shift, but also acknowledge that there's going to be bumps in the road. But we cannot, the fossil fuel companies are a very important part of our economy. Oil and gas is necessary. Lower gas prices now are essential. We know what's creating those high gas prices, and part of that is the fact that we don't domestically own our own energy system. And that's part of the reason why we need to make this transition, so we can dictate our own future, not leave that dictated by dictators in other countries. Yeah. And so we have to reconcile ourselves to the fact that that transition is essential. But we continuously look at who's left behind. We have been working hard to re-engage. We have a whole system, a clean energy and community system of making sure that those left behind when coal facilities are closed have a chance to use their skill set to close orphan wells or other ways. We are not going to sort of just think that the transition is happening on a dime. But the anxiety I think we all feel is the need to accelerate and the need to keep everybody in the game. That's the only way our economy is going to continue to function and move forward.
Great. Okay, let's turn to the audience for questions. Wow, okay. Maybe we'll do two at a time. How about over here, and then maybe both of you? Okay, sure. Yeah.
This is a question about clean, firm energy.
Clean what energy?
Firm energy, energy that's available 24/7, which is what most fossil plants produce.
Yes.
And that's what we're kind of used to. We've built an economy on that. We've talked an awful lot about solar and wind. Solar, that's intermittent energy. Solar, for example, produces, the best solar farms in the United States produce useful energy less than a third of the time because of weather and night and seasons. What are we doing to get clean, firm energy, that 24/7 energy that works regardless of the weather? Thank you.
And then we'll go ahead and get these two, and then we'll get answers.
Hi, my name is Rebecca. I'm a teacher. I'm only gifted this experience because my students won the Aspen Challenge, creating a hub for climate activism for the youth in Louisiana. In my last session, there was a CEO panel of very bigwigs who said that the people that they were scared of the most was young activists. That was the greatest thing I've heard in a very long time. And so we are from Cancer Alley in Louisiana. Yes. We do lose our water pressure all of the time. We are worried about carbon capture and sequestration being put in our marginalized communities even more. And so I'm going to turn it over to Akshita so that you can give her more advice.
So the main question I have is, as being part of a group of environmental activists, what role do you think environmental activists play in the path to net zero?
Great. Okay, so firm energy, and then...
Let me take that one, and
okay.
You can hit that one, ballpark. The transitory nature of solar and wind is real. I don't think it's quite as dramatic as you think it is. Wind, actually, when you do offshore wind, it generates electricity all the time. Because that's what happens in the ocean. That's why it's such a good place to be when the wind blows. But the really next step in this process, as you're thinking about how it mixes with other fossil fuel energy, is to actually move towards better and better battery technology. Mm-hmm. We need storage. And so there's significant breakthroughs that have already happened, but there's also significant opportunities that the bipartisan infrastructure law brings to the table to invest in more battery innovation, and a lot of that's happening at the Department of Energy, but also to look at the grid system. We have to advance the grid in ways that aren't so regional as much as they are providing opportunities to actually borrow and have energy move so that those loads where there's difficulty in meeting energy needs all the time, that we have an opportunity to draw as much as we can. And there's a significant amount for both batteries and for grid development in the bipartisan infrastructure law, and we're going to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think, before you even factor in regulations and the like, when you look at last year alone, 80% of the investments and new generation in this country was wind, solar, and battery storage. The market is moving in that direction. I think we're also taking a very close look from a technological standpoint at if you do have a new gas plant facility, what should that look like? If you are investing in infrastructure, what should that look like? And is that infrastructure and those investments going to contribute to the deployment of hydrogen or future fuels that have a much lower carbon footprint? And so, we know what the future is, but we're also cognizant that we're not going to get there tomorrow. We didn't get in this situation overnight. We're not going to get out overnight. And so we have to think very smartly about how we deal with existing baseload challenges. But Gina is exactly right. This really isn't an ideological view of the future. This is where technology and markets are taking us. And so we're excited to be a part of that.
Can I just add to that, Michael, because my daughter is the director of the energy efficiency programs in Massachusetts. I do not want her to see this without mentioning energy efficiency and community solar. The best thing we can do is allow us to move forward to reduce the footprint that we already have. And part of this is heat pumps.
Yeah.
Heat pumps are incredible. So it's not like we just have to depend on the grid. We have to depend on our ability to get off the grid and to actually lower the energy demand that we have. And the advances in technologies for that are just incredible.
They are.
And people are staggered by the cost reductions that these provide. So we are seeing a lot of the big utilities actually engaging in these discussions in ways that aren't about, oh, you took money away from me to do energy efficiency. They're like, how do I start investing in energy efficiency? Because they've figured out a way to amortize that.
Yes.
They're going to make money on this while people are better off. So there's a whole ways in which we can not just address the challenge of energy that we expect to see, but impact that in a way of really reducing our energy needs tremendously with these great ways. Heat pumps are freaking awesome.
I'll jump on this one.
I would, okay,
Yes.
yeah, jump in on this one.
So-
There's like people are at the edge of their seats,
sorry.
so we
This
can
one-
have quicker answers that we can get to more questions.
Your question is so great because whether I'm having conversations domestically or traveling internationally, to sit in rooms full of young people and have them ask the hard questions. Questions that you just can't, you can give a BS answer to a committee in Congress. You can't give a BS answer to young people.
You have never done that, though.
No, I've never done that. There has never been a major movement in this country that wasn't led by young people. When you think about the civil rights movement, when you think about voting, when you think about women's rights, when you look back at the footage, those are young people who are being attacked by dogs or sitting in or taking a stand. Those are young people that put pressure on presidents and Congress and people like Gina and myself. So absolutely, youth advocacy is critical. And Gina and I both have spent some time in advocacy organizations. We understand the power of advocacy organizations. We understand how to harness that as well. I think that you all are in a unique position to keep the pressure on us, but you also have a unique power to control information, social media, messaging. You also are the largest contributors in many cases to the market. So you can use economic and market power as well. The amount of power that young people have is astronomical, and the worst thing that could happen is you not use it.
Okay. Maybe the two on the aisle here. Yeah. Sorry if I don't get to your question. There are so many.
Good morning. My name is Juan Carlos. I'm a climate negotiator from Panama and a scholar at the Obama Foundation. Administrator Regan, you mentioned that one of your goals is that every American has equal protection under the law from environmental hazard. And Advisor McCarthy, you also mentioned that your goal is to not leave any community behind.
Yeah.
These are great goals, but I hope that administration also channels these goals internationally. So in that line, what is it going to take for developed countries like the U.S. to actually start paying for the loss and damages caused by the climate crisis in countries like mine that did nothing to cause this issue but are suffering the biggest impacts? Additionally, when should we expect the U.S. to submit the updated NDC, which should have an increase in ambition as we agreed in Glasgow last year, and what we should expect to see on this ambition increased climate pledge? Thank you.
Two great questions. Do we want to just go up here for one more quickly?
Hi. You talked about community engagement and the importance of talking to communities in plans. Usually, the communities where there's more needed action, folks don't trust their government already. So how do you ensure that people are brought to the table meaningfully and not just like town hall check they were engaged, but really engage in the design of these plans and moving forward? Thanks.
Might I suggest that Advisor McCarthy, you take the first two, and Administrator Regan, you take the second one? Is that okay?
The first of
Yeah,
the two.
well-
Okay, I thought.
Well,
you said
Evie,
first
both his questions about the NDC and
Yep.
loss of damage.
Well, the NDC is we issued a strong NDC. The challenge that we have now is to track it and to be very clear about the challenges ahead and how we get there. We have plans that we have submitted. We're updating those plans consistent with the promises in Glasgow, which is great. Your issue on how do we, as a developed country, pay our fair share, especially to support countries that have not been part of the problem, but have owned a lot of the challenges associated with the problem. I get that issue. And Secretary Kerry has been, I would say, enormously engaged in that exact question. If you look at the work we did in Glasgow, if you look at the work we're preparing for the next COP, you will see that we have tripled our monetary commitment. Is it where it needs to be? No, but we keep moving forward. We keep demanding of Congress additional resources to try to address this challenge. But we are also, as we move forward with many of the MEFs that have recently happened, to try to engage other countries in collaborating in a regional way so that we can be as supportive as we possibly can. Are we where we need to be? No, and I'm not going to pretend we are, and neither would Secretary Kerry. But we understand the obligation that countries like the U.S. has, and we have to keep moving forward to get the resources we need to actually meet our responsibility. But our NDC is solid. Yeah. The work we're doing to track it is solid. People will understand and be able to see every step of the way how we're moving forward domestically. Because if the U.S. doesn't move forward dramatically and domestically on our own to show how we're addressing climate, we cannot provide international leadership.
Do you want to pick on community engagement?
Three quick points. Journey to Justice tour. Normally, when the government goes and does a tour like that, we consult with the White House, we consult with congressional representatives, we design it in a way where we go into these communities and it's safe and it's comfortable, and then we move on. The Journey to Justice tour, we skip steps 1 and 2. We partner directly with the advocacy groups on the ground. They told us which communities to go to and what issues to focus on in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. That's the model. The American Rescue Plan has given us $100 million to push resources into those organizations so that they can strengthen their organizations so that we can have stronger partnerships. We plan to do that all over the country. We did a Journey to Justice tour last November. We're planning to do a Journey to Justice tour 2 and 3 to hit different parts of the country. So you'll see that kind of framing, directly engaging these local communities in that capacity, in that way, giving them the ability to lead. The last thing I'll say is, under the President's leadership, we're taking advantage of, at EPA, we're going to create a new Environmental Justice and Equity Office. We have Senate-confirmed leadership that makes the decisions on air, water, and waste. For the first time in history, EPA is going to create a national program office to have a Senate-confirmed person at the head that would be responsible for environmental justice and equity, which means you have a very powerful person on a leadership team ensuring that equity and inclusion is integrated in everything that we do at EPA. So we're making structural changes, but we're also engaging in a partnership way that the agency, and quite frankly, this government never has. And this is not unique to EPA. Gina's job is to make sure that all of us play well together as cabinet officials. So I'm leveraging the resources from USDA, from DOE, from DOD. This is a whole of government approach, and I feel good that EPA is leading the way, but we're not the only ones.
Can I just add one more short point? Is that, you know, I've been in government pretty much my whole life, and I'm 68 years old, right? And as my understanding of what I do in government is not to make people comfortable. It's to embrace the discomfort, because that's what makes government change. And so it's all about going into the communities and listening to what they say in a way that makes me realize that change is absolutely essential and gives me the data and the understanding of how much this is going to mean to the people that I work for. And so I think we've missed the boat entirely if we think that our job is to make the youth quiet or happy. My job is to make them as happy as I can by specific issues, but keep pushing. Government only works when they listen to the voice of the people we're supposed to serve. Mm-hmm. And we make sure that their voice is as strong and as loud as it can. Nothing changes otherwise. We're in a democracy. It's people that matter.
Well, we are over time. I apologize if I wasn't able to get to your questions. Thank you so much, Administrator Regan, Advisor McCarthy.
Thank you.